Hello and welcome to today's episode of Agile TD Mondays. Today with Elise Carmichael from QASymphony. She will talk about automated API tests and how to test them with Postman and Newman. But before, let me tell you to register for the 9th edition of the Agile Testing Days. Learn more about testing, Agile leadership and management, test automation, and so much more. Go to agiletestingdays.com/register and book your ticket now. And now to you, Elise.
All right, hello everyone. So I have a short talk for you today about the importance of automating your API tests and how to test RESTful APIs with Postman and Newman. So let's go ahead and get started. Just to give you a little background about myself, my name is Elise Carmichael. I'm the VP of Quality at QASymphony. We're the makers of QTest Manager, a popular test case management tool, and a whole host of other products focused around software testing. And just a little bit about my background, just so you know who is talking to you. I started out studying computer science in college, but even before that, I was busy at home programming on my Commodore 64 as a kid. I started professionally as a software developer, and I've always had an interest in testing applications and testing them well. I've worked in a variety of different industries, such as e-commerce, trucking and logistics, and healthcare. So that's me. And just to quickly go over the agenda here. So the first thing we're going to talk about are all the different types of APIs you may want to test. You may or may not have all of these at your company. Then there's so many types of testing, so why are we focusing on API testing versus other types of testing? Thirdly, we're going to actually write some tests against a RESTful API. I'll use the QTest Manager public API as my demonstration using Postman. And then finally, how to execute those Postman tests using Newman, which is a command line runner for Postman. This will allow you to execute your tests as part of your continuous integration. So first, I want to talk about some of the different types of APIs. So if your software is entirely fully automated for your tests, you've probably covered all of these, but just in case it's not, we'll go over some of these types of APIs. So the first one is your own public API. So if your application is a public API that other people use to integrate with their software, this is where I would start automating. So the thing that people accidentally do terrible things to as they're trying to write their own tests. The second type of API that you'd want to focus on is any externally facing endpoint. So any of your web services or anything that provides software or content for your end client application. Now this is where I find the bad guys lurking. So this is another place I would start adding API automated tests. Thirdly, are microservices or any kind of middle layer. These are great to automate the testing for, to verify functionality. In theory, these aren't public, so they're not as dangerous, but they're certainly a thing that you want to test. And then lastly, if you're using any third-party APIs that you consume in the application, these are a great thing to test. I've actually had it happen where I was using a health company's service and they changed their API one day without notice. And it technically adhered to their spec, but they changed a few new line characters and things that I couldn't really see in the documentation, and this broke our application. So if I could have noticed this sooner than our customers, that would have been nicer. So this is a thing that if you have time, I'd recommend. Now, if you're using just Google's public APIs or some of the bigger companies, you're probably safe here. They'll warn you before they make any changes. They also make sure everything is backwards compatible. So why do I care about API testing? And I actually would start with API testing over any kind of other automated testing you do in the application. And the reason is this: security, 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 security. Okay, I have two more of these. So there's a lot of different types of security testing that you may be doing already or that your company may be doing. An example might be a static code analysis. A tool like Checkmark, something like that, that is focused mainly on security, is really great at looking at the code for deprecated items or insecure code. So that's one possibility. This doesn't replace it. Another thing you might be doing is hiring a third-party company or using a tool to do penetration testing. Also great and invaluable. Don't get rid of that. You might also be doing functional testing with Selenium or Appium or other client-side testing tools, and that's really great for regression testing and making sure your users have a great experience. However, the easiest way to expose data to your undesirables, your hackers, is to make a mistake in your API. You may have forgotten to lock down some administrative functions or even locking down user data from the right users in a particular endpoint. This is really common. And then, of course, you could be preventing bad input in the UI. Maybe your login and password field seems safe from your mobile app or from your website, but everything must be prevented on the server side as well. So this is the way to prevent it on the server side. And if you don't prevent it on the client side and you're preventing it on the server side, you're still safe. So that's the main reason I start here. So why else? API tests are quick to write. They kind of behave like a function. You typically provide the same input and you expect the same output. Of course, you need your database set up or your data set up to start right correctly. And they're not only easy to write, they're quick to run. So this is another reason these are great. If you're running Selenium tests, you might know that they're extremely slow, relatively speaking. So you also get a lot of reusability. So maybe you already have some API tests and maybe you're using a tool like Postman or SoapUI. And if you make an API call, it's very easy to add in a test to verify the response time. So maybe you want to make sure that all of your calls are under 500 milliseconds or something like that. So you have some basic performance testing in your application. And lastly, I like to reuse those tests when I can as production monitoring tests. So not only are you ensuring that your application is performing okay in production, you're actually running some of these basic use cases against production, and this will give you a heads up if something bad has happened, and it could happen absolutely anywhere. So this is your first line of defense. So we're going to go over two tools, the first being Postman. So we use Postman here at QASymphony for our REST API tests, and I love it. It's free, popular, it's very, very popular. It's easy to use and it works great with continuous integration. And I'm in no way affiliated with this tool or this company, but as a software geek, I think this is one of the best tools that you can find for free. I've been a user since it was a Chrome plugin and it's now a standalone tool, and they put out releases so regularly that as I was preparing for this webinar today, some things that I was doing a few days ago didn't work anymore. So I made a few modifications. One thing that they added recently that I find really great is that they will mock endpoints for you. So if you are writing tests before you have this working services, or maybe you have the spec but not the entire service is working, you can mock the endpoints if you need to as part of writing automated tests or for your developers. So the second tool is Newman. This is actually a node package. It's a library, and you can install it on your computer globally. So this is great. It actually executes your Postman collections or your test suite from a command line. So what you can do with this is integrate it into your Jenkins or whatever CI tool that you're using and run it from a command line and get the results. It has a few features like reporter, so you can define what the output of the test results will look like, and we'll go over that at the end. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples. So I mentioned we're going to use the QTest Manager's API, so I'll show you that. We'll make two calls, one to log in, since that's the first call we're always going to make. And the second, we'll create a test case. As I mentioned, QTest Manager's a test case is extremely important. And then with that call, we'll verify a few things: the status code, the speed of the response, and the actual response itself. After that, we'll set up some variables in Postman, and I'll show you the runner, the GUI runner. We'll download the collection and the environment, and I will show you running that from Newman. Okay, so I'll go ahead and pull everything up here. This is Postman. This is QTest Manager. And this is our API documentation. I'll use a few examples here with credentials that you're welcome to come back and use if you so desire. I'll give you a username and password as we go through this if you want to follow along. However, I cannot promise that those credentials will last forever. I'm going to find the login endpoint. And as you start looking at documentation for different tools, they're all going to look a little bit different. If you're testing your own tool, you're probably already quite familiar with it. So I have the documentation up here, and we'll just sort of follow along. So the first thing we want to do is create a new test here. new call. I'm going to put everything in this webinar folder. And I can see that this is a post call. So the first thing I'll do, I have a new tab up here. I can click plus to add another one. I'm going to change that to a post. I know that my URL is this qas.qtestnet.com. And then I'll put anything here will go after the base name here. /token. And I can see, looking at the documentation, which I won't go in depth into because every API is different. This one uses basic authentication. And Postman is really great, and it gives me a lot of different types of built-in authentication methods. One thing you do with basic authentication is you have to create a hash. And so Postman will do that for me, which makes the testing really, really easy. So you're welcome to use this username. It's Elise Carmichael at QASymphony.com. It has a couple periods in it. And in the previous version of Postman that I had from a week ago or so, I actually had to hit a button that says update my header. So what this is going to do, when I click send, it will update and create a header for me called authorization. But I don't have to do that. But what I do need to do is set the body. This tells me that there are 3 parameters. And just for kicks, I'm going to show you what happens when I don't pass anything good in. So this is a test I might have separately. But for now, I want to do a happy path. So I want form URL encoded. I'm going to set the grant type, password, the username to my username, e.l.isecarmichael at QASymphony.com. Password, my password, which you are welcome to use. Password 1. I'll hit send, and I actually got something that I expected here. I can verify it looks something like what the documentation told me. So that's great. I can save this. I can rename it. So this is login. I'm going to save it to my collection. There are a couple of versions of Postman. There's a paid version, and you can have teams and you can share these collections. You could also just export this collection and commit it to your source control repository. A couple different schools of thoughts, depends on how your company likes to operate. So now I want to go into this test tabs to actually do my tests. So one of the things I mentioned that we want to test is the status code. This is kind of the most straightforward thing. Just make sure my call worked. And there are these little code snippets on the right side. So I can actually just click status code is 200. Click send. And I see now I have test results. So it passed, it was 204 kicks. Let's just change it to something else. But failed when I set it to 201. I'll set it back to 200. One of the other things I wanted to do was just a performance test. So there's a lot of basic snippets in here, and there is definitely one for performance. Let's see if I can find it. Response time. So I'm going to check that it's under 500 milliseconds. This is just the name of the test for what shows up in the results file. So that worked as well. And this is actually, I could change this to be above. This is actually using the chai behave assertion library. This is all JavaScript code. So almost any JavaScript you can put in here. There are some limitations because they only allow certain libraries. And one thing that, if you're familiar with JavaScript at all, or the dev tools in Postman, or in Chrome, you get the same dev tools if you go to View, Show Dev Tools, that you do in Chrome. So this is really great if you're trying to debug your test. So I can write console log Monday webinar. Send. And I can see that I put it in the log up here in the console. So that's kind of handy to have. Of course, you can put variables or whatever you'd like in there. So the last thing I wanted to do is verify some of the response. And like I said, since you have JavaScript, you can do anything you want, really. But I like to keep my tests fairly simple so that I'm more likely to have broken code and not broken tests. So I want to verify that this word administration is within this scope variable. So one way I can do that, I'm just going to copy this in here so that you don't have to watch me type this out. What I have here is my response object. I'm turning it into a JSON object in JavaScript. It's really great being native to JavaScript. And then I can access any of these first level key value pairs with just the dot operator. And then I'm using this JavaScript contains function on the string. So that worked just great. So the final thing that I want to do here is I want to store this token because I'm going to use it in my test suite. I'm going to need this for all of my subsequent calls. So what I can do is set an environment variable. You have two types of variables, environment and global. So I'm going to set an environment variable. I'm going to call it token. And then I want to put that value in here. So I could do this whole thing again, or I could set it to a variable. Maybe I want to reuse it. It's a little cleaner. If I send that and everything worked, which it looked like it did, I didn't get any errors. If I put junk in here, I would get an error. I didn't have any syntax errors. So I expect that this token variable is saved. And now I can make another call and actually use it. So the next call that I'd like to make is to create a test case. This call right here. And what it will do, so this is QTest Manager. I want to create a test case under this folder. So I'll need a little bit of information from this page, so I'll come back here and grab it. So let's make a new call. I'm gonna hit plus. I know that this is going to be a post. I have the same base URL here, and it's API v3 projects. Now in here, I'm looking for the actual project ID. So I can just tell you, I'll grab that from here. It doesn't change. Put it right there, and then slash test cases. Of course, if I just hit send on this, I get an unauthorized error. So if you look through the documentation, you'll know that you have to add a couple of headers on all of the calls. So one of them is authorization. And I know it has to be the word bearer followed by that token. And the way you use that variable is you do two curly braces on either side. It will turn it orange if it sees that this is a value that already exists. If it doesn't exist, it'll be red. And I also know I need the content type here. Application JSON. Okay, so what this is telling me is I need the body set, and I see that I'm passing in JSON to it. So what I want to do is select raw for my body type. And again, so that I don't have to type all of this out in front of you. I'm gonna copy and paste something that will work here. This is just what I want to create as a test case. It's got two steps, two test steps, and I'm passing it the parent ID. And that parent ID is actually going to be this folder's ID. And I can just call this and see if it worked. It didn't. So this could be a handful of things. Let me go ahead and see what I might have done. Go ahead and save this. I'm going to put it right next to the other call. Right, that's the case. I'm storing that token. Let's see if I have a typo, authorization, error. Interesting. So this is obviously a fun part of what you're doing is debugging your tests as you write them. So I'm going to try and figure out just for a few seconds here if I can figure out what is going on. So one thing I could do is copy this in here. Maybe I'm storing the token incorrectly. So apparently I was storing it incorrectly. And so what I could do is console.log. There are a lot of ways you could do this, but this is one option. I'm going to print out this string here. Oops, I have to open up the console again. So it looks like it's saving it right. Set in my environment variable. I call it token. You can try it one more time. One thing that you also get is you can hover over this and see the value. Aha. So I have a global environment variable called token, and so it's not the right value. So it's overwriting it. So what I can do is set up a new environment just for this. So what I'm going to do, I clicked on that gear icon. These are my environments that I have already. So I'm going to add a new environment. Call it Monday webinar. And there's a couple things I might want to use in my environment as variables specifically for this test. So one might be my project ID. Maybe I don't want to hard code that. And if I can look it back up, it's this here. Let's go ahead and do that. I called it Monday webinar, and let me choose this. And then I can replace this project ID with the variable project ID. So I'll hover over it, looks good. I can hover over this, see if that gets replaced. So it did get replaced. I don't know if you remember there was a B, it started with a BB. So now let's try this call again. So great, that worked. And I can see that it created my test case. I think I've called it twice now. And those test steps got passed in as I expected, and it put it in the correct folder. So what I would normally do is run about 20 different scenarios, some of these with appropriate content. Maybe I'll replace the body and put junk in there. Maybe I'll try logging in as a different type of user and creating a project that I don't have access to, or creating a test case in a project. And I'll add all these tests here to verify the response. But because we don't have a ton of time today, I am not going to go through all of that. What I will show you is one more environment variable. So this is probably your most common one that you're going to use in these environments. Is I want to run this in, you know, a dev, a staging, a production type of environment. So I can just pass a different environment to it. So I just replaced the base URL there. I'll go back to manage. You can click on this to edit. Maybe I'll add my URL. I'll do the same thing on the login call. That still worked. Can I still create a test case? Yep, that still worked. Awesome. So what I want to show you is what the command line, or sorry, the GUI runner looks like. I clicked runner there. And I can actually just select the folder, the collection that I want. I can see it has these two calls in it. I'm going to select the environment to be Monday webinar, and I'm going to click run. So it did everything I expected, everything passed, and that's fantastic. It would obviously turn red if it failed. This is great, but I can't include it in CI. So what I would like to do is save my collection. You can do that by either clicking there and clicking on the dots, or just clicking on the dots. You want to export it. And this is the thing I noticed isn't compatible with something else I had on my computer. So I'm going to save it as a V2 right now. This just came out, I think, in this past week. So I'll export that. I'm going to go ahead and put it on my desktop and call it webinar Postman collection JSON. Is all the details of the call here. And then I want to export the environment. And the webinar Postman environment. Save it to my desktop. And I'm on my desktop here. And the command to run from Newman, I can see if it's installed. You have to have npm and node installed. And once it's installed, you can type Newman, and that's how you know it's successfully installed. I won't go through the details of that, but you can get to it if you just Google Postman Newman. And it'll give you instructions on how to install it. It's quite simple. Okay, so to run that same test suite from the command line, I'm just going to type Newman run. And then I need the name of the collection. I think I named it webinar. Yep, that's the one. And if I want to pass in an environment to it, because it won't work otherwise since it doesn't know what URL is. Monday. Just call, I think I have a space in there. Oh, my login call took too long. Look at that. See if I can do it again. Maybe my login call will be faster. Regardless, that's a perfectly acceptable failed test. So that's great to know. And then the very last thing I wanted to show you with Newman today are some of the reporters. So this is pretty common in a test framework to have reporters, so that if I want the output to not just be this, I can write it to a file, which is what I would need to do if I were, say, using Jenkins. So there's a lot of flags that you can pass into this. So one of them is reporters. And if I want it to write JUnit style output, and then the CLI, so the command line interface, so I still want to see it in a pretty way. And then I can actually define where it puts the JUnit style report. So this will be really great if I include this in something like Jenkins. So what this did is it created a result XML file. Take a quick look at it. Looks something like that, exactly like you'd expect if I had a failure. It would look like a JUnit failed, so it would tell me what failed about it. And I still saw the pretty output here. So that is basically all I have to show you regarding basics of Postman and testing, and then how to run those tests from Newman.
You said that Postman has some limitations regarding libraries. Did you come across any other problems?
It's actually quite extensive. So one time I was trying to log into, I think, a Gmail account, and I needed a certain encryption library, and at the time it wasn't available, but I was also trying to do something a little bit non-standard. So it's really just non-standard types of things you might do from your calls. And the other limitation is, obviously, this is just for RESTful APIs. So if you want one tool to test all of your APIs and you have SOAP APIs or you're using .NET or something and they're not REST APIs, that's going to be a limitation.
Thank you very much. Next week, Diana Larson will tell you more about the Agile Fluency model and how you can achieve great benefits with this model. Please tune in next Monday, 13th of October. Thank you, Elise. This was very interesting. I had a lot of fun watching you doing this and running the tests. Right. Thank you very much for taking the time. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.